Good morning and welcome. We are going live from Washington State University, Vancouver, my hometown. I am so pleased to welcome everyone. This is the Executive and Governance Committee meeting, and we unfortunately do not have our board chair here, so I will be stepping in to host the meeting over the next 2 days. And I'm thrilled to have our chair of this committee, who will be Zooming in with us. And we anticipate that we will have one other regent that will also be participating. So just a reminder, we're going live in Zoom and over YouTube. The regents will be taking breaks throughout the day. And in the Executive and Governance Committee, we have 2 action items to review this morning. Those action items will be the 2024 Board of Regents meeting schedule and the proposed revisions to the Board of Regents policy on delegations of authority and the corresponding delegations. At the conclusion of the Executive and Governance Committee, we'll announce that the board will conclude the committee and will move to the Strategic and Operation Excellence Committee. So I just want to remind the audience that we're live and ready to go. So with that, let's first start with the 2024 Board of Regents meeting schedule. President Kirk Schultz.
Hello, I think we've talked about this before. We haven't really changed much on here. I think we're going to try once again to make sure we do the electronic meeting in January. And then have the rest as in person. We've got some really exciting things that I look forward to talking to you about around how we may want to structure the retreats a little bit differently, particularly that one in the summer around strategic planning, but we'll have some discussion on that a little bit later. So that's all there is. I think we want to make sure that we're always getting those dates out as early as possible. We would ask the regents if anybody has a known significant conflict or something, let us know as soon as possible. Otherwise, these dates, once we get them locked in, really have to pretty much keep them as is. That's all I have, Madam Chair.
Okay. Let's move over to the proposed revisions to the Board of Regents policy on delegations of authority and corresponding delegations. So President Schultz and Executive Director for Policy and Governance, Daniel Hess.
And Nathan Dean.
And Nathan Dean.
Yes.
Good morning. Short chair.
Yeah, all of them, I think, were as low as possible, except Mel's. That one was all the way at the top. So, yeah.
Well, the regents have seen this item several times. You're probably getting tired of it, although it has changed a little bit each time you've seen it. I think we talked about it at the June retreat is where Nathan kind of kicked it off and talked about delegations generally, and then we spoke about it again as a future action item in September. And you might recall, except for Judy, of course, you've not seen this before. So if you have any questions, please feel free to interrupt. You might recall in September, we recommended 2 specific changes. One was to increase the president's delegated authority to approve legal settlements from $2.5 million to $5 million, which would make it consistent with the president's other contractual authority. The other was sort of a category of changes, and we had recommended that we eliminate the report back requirement, which is in a number of the delegations that the president can approve this, but needs to report back at a subsequent Board of Regents meeting regarding any action taken under this delegation. And a number of you expressed some concern with eliminating that requirement. And so we walked that back and we basically changed the oral report back requirements to written report back requirements. And so those delegations that have report back requirements now have all been, we're proposing that they all be changed to have written report back requirements. And that's basically going to help us improve meeting efficiency while still giving the Board of Regents the information that they need. So I think that hopefully will have satisfied that concern. Other changes include And these are just generally, I'll go over the specific ones that have changed from the future action item in just a minute. But, overall, we did a lot of cleanup. We updated the policy to correspond with new resolutions that had been passed since the policy was implemented in 2016. There were some inconsistencies there. So wanted to make sure that everything was coherent and consistent. It is an umbrella policy. It consolidates delegations system-wide. And so what that means is that we keep finding delegations. We're like, oh, we didn't know about that one, or this, finance administration's been doing this for 10 years and we didn't know about it. It's not in the policy. So we did find one of those, and that had to do with the president's authority to issue refunding bonds. And so we've now updated the policy to include that. We keep checking again to make sure that delegations are consistent, not only with policies, but also practices. So for example, in the faculty manual, it's very clear that only the Board of Regents can approve a declaration of financial exigency. So we updated the delegation policy to make that clear as well. The facility naming policy makes it clear that the president has authority to approve or to assign names for minor facilities. The delegation wasn't as clear as we would have liked that to be, so we went ahead and updated that as well. So basically, every time we look at it, we find new ways to improve it and to make it better. So we do have a couple of changes that are different from the future action item in September, and I'm going to go ahead and just list those out for you, since I think those are the ones that you would want to focus on. So for time critical contracts, the president has authority to sign those, currently has authority to sign off on time critical contracts after consultation with the chair of the Board of Regents. Previously, there was no cap on the amount that those contracts could be. And after consulting with Nathan and talking about it further, we are recommending a cap of $15 million on those time critical contracts. And those are contracts that come up between Board of Regents meetings that really need to be taken care of immediately. So again, the president would still have to consult with the chair of Board of Regents, and the financial limit or the cost limit would be $15 million on those. As I mentioned, we discovered a resolution that had been signed in 2013 authorizing the president to issue refunding bonds, which he has been doing. And so that authority has clearly been delegated. It simply wasn't reflected in the policy. So we changed that. We also are proposing a cap to the president's authority to sign operating agreements with WSU affiliated entities such as the foundation. And that's just that currently those are uncapped. They're very difficult to assign a monetary value to because they have so many different elements to them. And so I think Nathan suggested, and we are recommending a term cap. So it would basically be the maximum term for those agreements would be 5 years under this delegation. So basically he has the authority. Currently, we're just putting a cap on it that relates to the term, i.e. the duration of the contract. And that seemed easier than to try to assign a financial value. We are proposing modifying the president's authority regarding naming, again, making it clear that he can name minor facilities, which he has been doing and which is in the policy. It's just hasn't been very, very clear. So we're going to go ahead in that resolution and ratify any prior names that have already been approved under that policy. We're also changing or proposing changing his authority to assign names to major facilities and academic units to indicate function. Currently, the president has authority to assign temporary names to indicate function, but we're proposing removing the word temporary because a lot of those end up not being temporary. So I think that's it. That pretty much covers all of the things that are different from the future item. If anyone has any questions, please let me know. Otherwise, if the regents approve of this proposal, there would be a motion tomorrow to approve both the changes to the policy on delegation of authority and also adopt the corresponding resolutions. Did you have anything, Nathan, that you wanted to add?
No, you covered it very well.
Great.
I would add, if I could, I just appreciate the work on this. These are the kinds of things. It's really a cleanup operation, but it's just making sure we're being consistent in how we operate. We're following our written guidelines. We're keeping the board informed as per the guidelines, and that the board feels comfortable with these things. And some of them have been in place for a decade. It's important that people look at it, review it, and say, yeah, we're still comfortable with that delegation. So I appreciate us getting this cleaned up. It's not glamorous work, but we really need to do this just from a governance point of view. So appreciate Danielle's work on this. I could do it for 5 minutes before I'd run screaming out of the room.
I like it.
Yeah, and she likes doing it, so it's all good, and Nathan as well. So it's been a really nice team effort, so thank you.
Great.
Are there any questions?
Great. Thank you.
Thank you. These action items will come before the board tomorrow at the Board of Regents meeting. I was remiss in officially welcoming Judy McDonald to the Board of Regents. And so since we very quickly went through a half an hour committee meeting in 10 minutes, I do want to take the time to introduce Judy. She is a professor from the Department of Mathematics and Statistics. She was selected by Governor Inslee and appointed as the first ever faculty representative on the Board of Regents. And Judy actually served as the first ever faculty representative before the legislature took action in 2018, which happened to be the first year that I was appointed. And so it's great to see you back at this table. And I think the significance of this appointment, both by the legislature and by Governor Inslee, really demonstrates the shared governance and the importance of the faculty at this table. And so I just want to welcome you and appreciate you being a part of this group. So
thank you. I'm excited and intimidated by the opportunity.
I've never seen you be intimidated.
I don't think that. If I
Welcome back. Last time you just were here for fun, and now you're
Right now I have to be serious about things.
now we expect you to work. So
I just want to make sure we acknowledge that we voluntarily, as a leadership team, working with our faculty senate colleagues, decided multiple years ago that it was important to have a faculty voice on the board. And so it was really interesting when it was actually approved at the state level. I had a lot of other presidents like, what is this like? You know, we're worried about it's going to really change the style of our meetings. And I said, for us, it's been highly productive. And you all as regents never treated the faculty representative as somehow a lesser member of the board and would ask for that input. So to me, it doesn't feel like we're doing anything all that much differently. You get to vote now, but I think it's a place where WSU led in the state. And I'm just really pleased that we were able to take that step forward to make the faculty representative a voting member. So anyway, welcome. Glad to have you back.
all right. Thank you for the nudge and appreciate you being here. This is your first meeting. We have had other representatives from the faculty that have served in this capacity before and appreciated their leadership as well. So with that, unless there's anything else, I will conclude the Executive and Governance Committee and we'll now move to the Strategic and Operational Excellence Committee. I just want to remind the audience that we're still live over YouTube and that links to the live stream are available on the Board of Regents website. I am happy to turn the meeting officially over to my fellow regent, John Shetler.
Thank you, Regent Schauer. Appreciate it. And I'd like to welcome everybody to the Board of Regents Strategic and Operational Excellence Committee meeting. And as Regent Schauer said, we are live over YouTube. Today, we have 2 discussion items and 1 action item. The first discussion item is WSU System Administrative Professional Compensation Plan Enhancements. And today, Teresa Elliott Beslick and the compensation manager, Melissa Denoto, will give the presentation. I'd like to turn it over to both of them.
So if I could, I'm going to tee this up while they're coming up. John, great to see you. And wish you were here, but thanks for joining us online. When we were working on my goals and objectives for the year, one of the things that was on there was the development of a comprehensive compensation philosophy for Washington State University as a system. And We really didn't have anything like that before. And so this is going to be a multi-step process. And what we also didn't want to do is go off in a closet somewhere, put something together and bring a finished product. When you said as a board, we would really like to be involved and engaged in how this is put together, and be able to provide constructive feedback as it's being done and put together. So when I talked to Teresa and Elizabeth about that, we talked about doing this over multiple meetings. And one of the first things we want to do is describe something that we're currently doing with some of our professional staff. So you have some idea of where we're going. We actually have a draft that we won't be talking about today of what a compensation philosophy could look like that we're starting to kind of work internally. And then we want to also add a faculty component. And my goal is by the time we get to the May meeting, we've had several of these discussions on a different part. We brought to the board a pretty comprehensive one that you all look at, you've been involved with, given us advice on, and we can check that off and say, okay, this is an important step for WSU to take as we worry about employee compensation and benefits and what we're doing together. So at first, Teresa was like, well, maybe we should wait and do this when we have more stuff. And we just really felt it was important to spend a little time today talking about what we're currently doing in this space. It's underway. We have some steps to take, get some input, and then we're going to keep building this thing over the next couple months. So thank you. I appreciate your willingness to be here with the board.
Great. Well, thank you. We're really excited to present the AP compensation plan to you today. I'm going to give a brief overview, and then I'll turn it over to Melissa, who will introduce herself and go over the plan. So as Kirk said, over the years, we're well aware there were issues with how we were doing the AP compensation plan, and we'd made some attempts to try to address it. The positive thing was I got support from Kirk and leadership for funding to hire an actual compensation specialist who could address that concern. And so we were lucky enough to get Melissa, who was charged with looking at how we were doing AP compensation and coming up with a plan that was easy to use by managers, transparent to our employees, and was based on data and good information. Prior to this plan, which we implemented in May of 2022, what we did was compiled the current salaries of AP employees by titles. And so really it was just WSU's information that we had available to managers to use. We were able to go out, of course, and get market data, but it wasn't very meaningful or easy for our employees or managers to use. And it seemed kind of like a mystery. So again, we were lucky enough to get Melissa, who over the years worked to develop this plan, going out doing presentations, outreach to our AP staff members, outreach to managers, doing presentations at the various university committees. And we were excited to get this going. Ties into Workday, which is also a benefit. And with that, I'll turn it over to Melissa, who'll give you a little bit about herself and I'll go over the plan.
Great. My name is Melissa Denoto. I've been with WSU since June 2019. But a little bit about my background. I have a bachelor's in human resources and master's in adult and organizational learning and leadership. I've worked at WSU and the University of Idaho, so I have extensive higher education experience. In addition, I worked for 6 years at Schweitzer Engineering Laboratories in Pullman. So in addition to higher education experience in compensation, I have both international and private experience. So the Washington State is more complicated than international compensation, believe it or not, with the different laws. But I'm very excited to be at WSU and working on what we have been doing to move the administrative professional compensation forward. As Teresa mentioned, the project came to be because based on different salary surveys and messages we were receiving throughout the university, there was a need to better address compensation, make processes more transparent, make it more accessible for people to understand, managers to understand how to apply employee compensation. We're receiving concerns about different geographic locations throughout the state and how the different geographies may pay differently based on size of the community, size of the office. And we really were looking to design tools so that we had equity and consistency across the WSU system. So working through this process, we developed tools, standard compensation tools, and in the process, we identified we needed to have a good way for position comparison. So part of this process was identifying and creating a point factoring structure and process to fairly and equitably compare roles across the university system. Take into consideration the geographic location. And as a result of that, we do have 3 geographic zones. So there are different pay differentials based on where the position is located. And we updated policies to reflect current practices and provide transparent guidance. Our policies reflected very high level, and then it was a mystery or a black box about how human resources was actually applying that policy. So the policy now reflects how we currently do it, how things were interpreted, so that everybody has the same understanding and it's applied more consistently. So with point factoring, what is considered within the process? When human resources is looking at a position description, we're really looking at the position requirements, position qualifications. We're not taking into consideration the position and the role. So a lot of what I'm going to be talking about early on in this presentation is really based on the position, and the person and the salary comes into it later. And a lot of time there's a lot of emotion around compensation, and it is so hard to separate that person from the position and set that a fair salary sometimes. But we're considering the impact and scope of the position and the role as it currently exists. There are so many times where departments are undergoing changes, and they have plans for the future, and they know what they want the position to look like in 6 months, 12 months, 5 years, and it can look significantly different. But when we're assigning point factoring and we're looking at the grade and the level, we're really needing to look at what the departmental needs are at this point in time, so that we're assigning that the correct grade, the correct salary range. And then as the position grows to what it's going to look like in that year or 5 years, that gives not only position growth, but also salary growth. So we're not putting a individual in a situation where they have that salary of what the position would look like in 5 years, and then the skills are growing to catch up to that salary. So we're also not considering the individual's time in the role. So somebody who has been in a role for 15 years doesn't necessarily impact the role and where it's placed in the point factoring, because the time in the role may not impact the work that's being done. And then again, we're not considering future status and compensation. The employee's current compensation is not a factor in where it's placed in a grade. So with point factoring, we have 4 major compensable factor areas. They are knowledge, problem solving, independence, and impact. So for each of these, when we're going through and assessing a position description, there's a matrix for each of these. So we're evaluating the depth and breadth of each of these. So for knowledge, we're looking at the special knowledge required for the essential responsibilities for the position description. We're looking at the minimum qualifications required, how the knowledge is gained, and we're also looking at how that knowledge is applied. And how the knowledge is applied, it really figures into the 3 other areas as well. And we're looking at the degree of integration with others to complete the work. So with the knowledge that they're they're applying in the job, are they working with other areas throughout the university? Or is it focused more on in one specific area? And all of these tie together. So as I explain these, you're going to see how each of these 4 factors really cross over and intersect and connect with each of them. So with problem solving, we're looking at the type of problems that the position is solving and the complexity of the problems, as well as the resources that are available. So for example, if a position has a simple problem that comes up pretty repetitively, that's going to score a little bit lower than a position that has more complex problems. There's not a known answer. It's going to require strategic thinking, really bringing in other people and looking at bringing people together to collaborate and solve that problem. And then we're also looking at what tools are available. So some of more of the less complex problems, it's easier to develop tools, resources, work instructions to take somebody through how to potentially solve that problem. The more complex problems, it's harder to identify that. And it's going to take that research and bringing those groups together to be able to identify what the problem is, what the best solution is, future impacts. And so problems of that nature are going to score more highly. The next factor is independence. So it's how much autonomy does the role have? How independently are they working? Availability of help and resources, and then the ability to rearrange and reprioritize duties. And that's not merely on a daily basis with rearranging daily work, but really looking at overall, this is what my job is, these are the projects I have, and being able to rework that and the degree to which they need supervisor approval to then rearrange the work. And then the last area that human resources considers is impact. So it's looking at what the work is that's being done and what touch that work has on which part of the university. Some roles may have work that only impacts their work unit or their department, and we have other positions around the university that have a much broader impact, and the work that they are doing actually impacts the entire system. And so with that matrix, we're looking at, is it transactional work that is impacting a department? Is it strategic work that's impacting the larger university system? And then with that matrix, we're then identifying points and putting points with that. And this is an illustration with our previous system that Teresa was describing. We had numerous titles. Our coordinator title tends to be, or still tends to be, one where a lot of different types of positions tend to go into it. It's very broad. We have multiple levels of work that's being completed. Previously, we were using the internal WSU salaries to use that as a range to identify incoming employees' salaries. So from there, we would have a minimum, which is the lowest employee salary. We would have the maximum, which is the highest paid employee salary, and then an average. And then the policy was to pay between minimum and average. In this case, the minimum was $3,000 a month. The maximum was $10,000 a month, and departments had no way of knowing how to place their positions within that range because we had such a broad range of skill. So with this point factoring structure, we're able to take a title like coordinator, apply the point factoring, assign grades, and put like skilled positions together, and it provides better guidance for those managers as they're setting salaries for their employees. As the salary structure was being developed, we we looked at individual position descriptions and really assessed the different titles. So for example, coordinator, I really dug into that coordinator title and grouping positions together. Another title that we have is administrative manager. As I was going through, we put together market data for each of the position groupings that we have. And we're really looking at academic and non-academic positions and getting market data from point factor or pay factors, which has recently joined forces with pay scale. And we also use CUPA, College Universities Professional Association survey data to get university-specific market data for our positions. So we gathered quite a bit of market data for multiple different positions within each title, point factored each of those positions, and then overlaid that information together to then inform salary grades. To address the geographic concerns that we had from the larger university community, we really looked at how we could apply the geographic concerns to the pay factor or the salary structure. And so we chose to use cost of living or cost of labor, excuse me, as the measure to which to assign geographic considerations, because the cost of labor is what employers pay for their talent within their organizations. The cost of living and the cost of labor tie together, but they don't necessarily drive one another. So cost of living would be inflation, and we are seeing that salaries are increasing with the inflation concerns that we're seeing now. The recruitments that are coming through, we are needing to pay higher salaries because of what we're seeing in the market, but the salaries aren't raising at the same rate at which we're seeing the cost of living increases. And the cost of labor also has an impact on supply and demand for the talent in that job market. So for example, in San Francisco, it's very high cost of living, as some of you may know, but in that market, they may have a surplus of information technology roles, so they are able to pay a lower salary than what you would expect with that high cost of living, because there is that surplus of talent, so they can find candidates that would accept that lower salary. Where smaller communities, you may need to, even though there's a lower cost of living, there may need to be a higher salary, higher cost of labor to draw talent to that market. And assigning the geographic consideration in the market that we're in, with so many positions having potential remote work or hybrid, we're really looking at where the position is based and not always where the person is necessarily working. This is the first part where the employee starts coming into the equation, or the candidate starts coming into the equation.
Can I ask one question about
Yes.
that last thing that you said is a tricky one, where the position is based as opposed to where the person is working. So there's a lot of evolution around that right now in the larger employment world, as I know you know. So tell me how you're thinking about that.
We have some positions that are based in Pullman, but they're allowing flexibility to work in Michigan or Colorado. And in those cases, the geographic location is based on Pullman. We're allowing some flexibility where if a position is technically based in Pullman, but there is a strong business need for it to be located in Seattle, and assigning the zone that is related to Seattle. And so there's some flexibility, but for the general rule is if the position is based in Pullman, but working in a different location, then it would be assigned the zone to Pullman. For example, if a position is based in Vancouver, but has flexibility to work in Pullman, they would still have the higher zone assigned to Vancouver versus the lower Pullman zone.
Are those the three zones, Seattle, Vancouver, and Pullman that you mentioned, or what are the three zones that are listed here?
The three zones are, and I can get you more data on that. I didn't bring the specific breakdown like that, but it is based on cost of labor data from our pay factors vendor. And they get national data that they compile and release annually. And that's compared to a national market. And so the zones are assigned based on those factors or those data points. And
so it's not a clear, like a third of the state. It's divided up differently.
Yeah, if we were to put the different Washington locations on a map and colored the three zones, it would be interspersed. So it's not, and you may see clusters in certain areas, but some of the smaller areas, as you get further from the larger cities and the larger metropolitan areas, would most likely fall in a lower zone.
So you can give an example of like Seattle, Vancouver on the high end. One of the surprising ones is Richland. The Tri-Cities is also cost of labor is high, which some of us maybe didn't think that would be the case. So that's an example. So it's not like a third. It's based on those markets.
And nationally, just off the top of your head, maybe you don't know the answer to this, but nationally, where does Pullman fall relative to, say, the rural areas nationally?
Nationally, Pullman is falling below the national average. As a whole, what we're seeing in some of our positions is we are needing to pay more of a premium to draw some of that talent into Pullman, since it is a rural community, and
especially for recruiting nationally.
Yes.
So
yeah, I just think it's, if you look out into the future and you think about administrative professionals and increased ability to work remotely, you may find that you will be doing what a lot of other employers are doing, which is giving people the flexibility to work from lower cost jurisdictions where they prefer to live for lots of good reasons, including value for the dollar. And if you are locking yourself into Pullman as the sort of center of cost of labor, then you may be putting yourself into a higher cost environment than you necessarily need to, just because, which is, a lot of tech companies are going the other way. They're saying, if you choose to live in, name your town. I don't know. Make assumptions like about the Tri-Cities, so, it's a tiny town USA, which happens to have a really low cost of living and a low cost of labor, that, you are still paying Pullman cost of labor rates, which may not be where you want to go in the long run. So I just put a cautionary note on that. Not that we are locked into this forever, but
yeah,
it's just not necessarily the long-term trend that a lot of folks are following.
So with this salary determination guide, this is a tool for hiring managers for incoming new employees. Even with our old structure, when we were pulling individual market data for the positions and sending that out to them, we were always recommending that if a candidate was lower qualified or minimum or meet the qualifications for the role, that they were hiring between the 25th and the 50th percentile of that market data. And so that aligns with what this is saying with the salary determination guide. The midpoint does rotate around the 50th percentile of consolidated market data. So it's following that same methodology, that same train of thought. And so this gives departments to assess candidate qualifications and hire between the minimum and the midpoint and the first and second quartiles, depending on the candidate qualifications. And if they have a very highly qualified candidate, they can still hire in the third or fourth quartile. We're just asking that they have a conversation with human resources so that we can not assess the candidate's skills, but have a conversation about potential future implications, bringing an employee so high into the range and limiting future salary growth. Because they still may have some growth within their position, but be at the maximum of the salary range. And that can be frustrating for all parties, still having career growth, but not necessarily having as much salary growth within the range. As we implemented this in May of this year, and when we implemented this, we had a significant number of employees that fell outside even the minimum of the salary ranges. And Human Resources shared out information to the different departments, different leaders around the university, and decisions were made to bring individuals up to the minimum of the salary structure. We do still have we have about 8% of employees that are still below the minimum, and about that same percentage of employees over the maximum. But as you can see from this chart, the majority of the AP employees are falling within the first and second quartiles of the salary ranges. Although this provides transparency and it helps departments, this has been a challenge for existing employees when they read the chart for the placement of the new employees and feeling as if Human Resources has assessed their skills and placed them in the first or second quartile when it is a mathematical placement of where their current salary is existing. We have seen some departments that have chosen to move some of their longer term employees into the third and fourth quartiles, but not as many. We've seen more movement into the first and second quartiles of all the different pay ranges. And with the placement in the quartiles, there is further flexibility. One area that we're having some challenges is in our Cougar Health Services area, hiring nurse practitioners, physician's assistants, and we're needing to assess different ways of approaching it because the way the point factors work out and way the positions are falling into the grade ranges, it's nowhere near what we would need to pay to bring a psychologist, nursing practitioner in to the clinic space. And so we are allowing flexibility and working with departments as they have individual needs and not adhering so strictly to that. But we're really looking at, is there a need? What is the need? Is it ongoing? Is it more of an industry specialization need, or is it one particular position? Great discussion.
I really like the compensable factors conceptually, but it does occur to me that they're somewhat subjective. And I imagine that part of why people lean towards time in the role or the current compensation is because it reduces bias. Can you talk a little bit about how the model or philosophy will account for potential bias?
Yeah, the chart with the compensable factors really does oversimplify what they are, because we do have a very detailed matrix with that. And with the matrix, we're looking at the depth and the breadth of each of those. And with those, each has a description with that. And so we do have a further description of is it transactional? How are they working with other people? And so it has to meet each of those different areas. And we have, as we've talked with departments, we have made changes to it to further clarify. And if we're not sure, we're not doing it in a vacuum. So if we're unsure how to evaluate or assess a potential portion of a position description, we're reaching out and we're having that conversation with the department to clarify. And so all parties have have impact and have that communication and collaboration in that process.
I had another question. It would be interesting for me, at least, because your comment about nurse practitioners raised this point of ignorance on my part of what all of our administrative professionals constitute. And so it would be really interesting for a future meeting or just an information item for the regents to have a pie chart or a breakdown of what all of our administrative professionals do by category or whatever's easy. Because I think we may not understand the breadth of that category. And I think it also could be interesting for us to look at our sort of various categories of human resources, our categories of people and human capital relative to our peers.
Right.
And we often look at faculty and research dollars relative to faculty, but we don't often look at other categories of human resource relative to our peers and look at ratios and all of that kind of thing. And I'm sure you do.
We do.
But we haven't looked at that. And so that would be an interesting thing for us to see as well, now that you're kind of getting into the data and the numbers. So would appreciate seeing that at some point.
Yeah, and the AP community is quite varied in terms of the work that is done.
Yeah. And we don't always see that. So I think it would be useful for us to see that.
Agreed.
That's great. And this topic has come up before, but the AP compensation structure and the different tools that we're using is not static. It's going to be dynamic. We've already received feedback within the university on how we could potentially change some different locations that may need to go into different zones, but we're trying to get to a space of kind of equilibrium. We're still very much in the implementation phase of this, and so really don't want to be making a lot of changes as we're trying to implement. We're trying to get people, employees, into a good space within the structure, and then start changing zones, which is going to change where they fall in the different quartiles. Changing zones, we may have more employees fall outside of the minimum of that salary range, and then the department's not being able to raise the salaries to the amount to bring into the minimum of that range. But human resources is going to continue to assess the different market data, where positions are falling, how we're using position descriptions, looking at our titles and how we define the titles and the work assigned to those titles, as well as various career ladders within our AP structure.
Could you pull the screen down, or the slide, so we could see John? And I think Brett's on. And
so thank you. Are there questions? And if there are, would you please direct them to Regent Shower, as I can't see the room necessarily, and how to direct them?
okay.
I
I've
have-
written down Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead, John.
Go ahead. I have a comment and question, and I just want to thank you both for the amount of work that you've done in pulling this together. I think it's super important to understand roles, responsibilities, what pay ranges should be to assure that we are compensating employees properly. Having the bands, the low, mid, and high points. So basically, I would call those the guardrails that you stay within. And as you said, this will be static. It will be constantly changing over time. What I didn't hear in this, and I don't believe it was even to be meant part of it, but and maybe we can do this at a future meeting, have a conversation about the overall performance evaluation process and how then these pay ranges tie into that so that we understand how people are performing, their overall dwell time that they're into the actual position. Think about, are there opportunities for promotion, and how does that all fit into ensuring that you have the right pay ranges for individuals at WSU?
And can I answer that? Okay. We're actually looking at our performance management plan. Within Workday, there's some opportunities there. So that's on our plan to tie that into the salaries decision-making. Actually, the hope would be for all employee types. So not just AP, but our civil service employees and maybe even up to faculty. So it's all very much at the planning stages right now.
Thank you.
John, before I open it up to any other questions, do you have any other comments or questions?
No, I don't. Thank you, Lisa.
Brett, do you have any questions or comments?
None at this time. I enjoyed the presentation and I thank staff for the thoroughness. That was terrific.
Are there any questions in the room before I start a long list? Yes.
I agree. Thank you. This is great and a perfect direction for us to be headed to make sure things are as equitable as possible. You mentioned at one point that before all this process started, that there were a pretty wide range of expectations of where people were actually hiring in or promoting into. In transitioning to this new system, how is that working with the various departments and employees and so forth? Because you may have people that were either severely underpaid or some people that were being severely overpaid for their position. And how are you managing that transition?
So we didn't want to harm any of the employees. So we moved them into based on the salary bands. They were identified. So it was all very transparent. And we wanted to be clear as we were going around talking about this, that employees are going to be able to see where they're placed within this band. And then there wasn't funding to magically bring everyone up. The areas are working to do that. So there were some of those situations where somebody's moved in and they're at or below the minimum or they're at the maximum. And so trying to address that individually was working with the departments and the employees. I don't know how many you want, if there was any specific examples.
I don't have any specific examples, but I've had lots of detailed conversations with different leaders throughout the university system about where their employees are falling and helping them to develop plans on how to move their employees. Some departments were able to give an employee a 30% increase, bring them into the minimum of the range, and then other areas are working on doing it incrementally. And so we've had a lot of communication. And it has been good because I've had a lot more conversations with different areas throughout the university system on salary equity and how to look at that, how to evaluate salary equity. What does that mean? How to address compression? What is salary compression? And so some of these topics that we haven't had a lot of necessarily open communication between the areas and my office or human resources as a whole. We've had bigger conversations. I feel like we're doing some really great things on slowly, but on a bigger scale in terms of addressing compensation and bringing some of those topics to light so that so it's not just a focus on one particular person or one particular area, but looking at compensation holistically within an area.
So has there been training developed so that all the entities understand this? And
over the time of implementation, there were numerous presentations to staff as well as managers on the process, and there's ongoing information and workshops, training regarding using this, the compensation plan.
one other quick question. How is the administrative professionals group reacting to this or thinking about it? 'Cause they come and report to us each time. I have,
Well, they were one of the key groups we were interacting with as we were developing the plan. I mean, they were partnering with us as we were moving through presentations. They hosted presentations, conversations. As with all things, some people are happy with it, some people are just okay with it, and then, of course, there's some people who are, unsatisfied. We saw this as a way, again, to be transparent with processes, and at the very least it gives areas the tools. They now have information when they have funds to address concerns. Before it was kind of more haphazardly, and so that's kind of what people are doing now. Again, some areas have addressed it, or some are putting in plans to make these changes, and they're talking to their staff about it, which is also helpful.
well, that's great.
Yeah.
Thank you. I'm done.
If I could, just around this, I won't go through all my things because you're next, but I would say that this has taken a couple years to get to this particular place. This wasn't all done in a couple months, and there was a lot of conversations. And having been through this at a couple institutions, everybody wants quantitative data. They beg for it. They want these bands. They do all that. As soon as you put it out, I can't believe I'm in 3. I should be in 4. And then you just sort of get this avalanche of dissatisfaction because you provided what was asked for, but everybody individually has their own assessment of where they are in these things. The mistake, if you will, that we made, and I take responsibility for this, is that it was developed. We'd done all that stuff, and we knew we did not have the funds to be able to move everybody up to the minimum. So then the question becomes, do you hold it for another year or 2 after doing 2 years worth of work until you have those funds identified? Or do you go ahead and put it out there knowing that appropriately some people are going to be pretty angry about, okay, you've identified I'm below, where's the money to get me there? So, if there's one thing I could, and I had a big magic pile of money, we would have introduced this at the same time, provided those resources immediately centrally to everybody to move up the employees from the minimum up until level 1. We'll get there. It just is going to take longer than it probably should have. And look, I'd be angry too if you identified that I was underpaid and everybody goes, well, we don't have the money to do it. I'd be pretty pissed off too. So I think we managed that well. I will say the HRS folks get beat up on this more often than anybody else. But we've taken what was, to all due respect to people, kind of the Wild West, and we've really put the barriers on. There's a quantitative data. It's not just comparing with higher education institutions, it's national data. So I feel that people may not be happy with it, but I feel confident that at least we have good information that we're using that's not just, okay, we looked at other public universities in the state or something like that. It's national data, and we put the regional data support in there too. And that was something we heard from employees all the time. I live here. How come I'm not paid more? My cost of living is more. Everybody's cost of living was more. We had that conversation every location through, and now we actually have a quantitative way to assess that with data that's not self-contrived that we're using from elsewhere. So I think it's gone better than I might have expected, but I think the key is 2 years from now, we're going to be so glad we have this in place, because as people move around, we hire new, we come up with resources. We actually now are doing it within a structure and not the emotions of it in a particular area. So I do want to acknowledge, though, doing it again, I wish we had identified those resources. I mean, we need resources everywhere, but this probably hurt a little bit of the rollout, is to not have that there immediately.
Well, the timing was not the best.
It's
Yeah,
well, that was,
all the reasons we know.
and that's the decision, Laura, that we made, was that it's done and we need to implement it, even if the timing's not ideal, because you can always find a reason to wait 6 months and wait 6 months.
Well, exactly.
And so I just want
Serve
to,
us well. In this
yes,
going forward.
but I do want to acknowledge that they worked really hard on this, and we felt
It
it
is a lot
important
of
to get it
work,
out
and
there.
I think we
Yeah.
all appreciate all that you all have done.
Yeah, kudos.
Thank you.
Go ahead. I know you got a bunch.
Well, I'm really excited about this because I think that is so needed. And I agree, there's never a good time to roll something like this out. But we also, I think, all recognize, Maslow's hierarchy at food and shelter, and compensation is a piece of that. And it feels like even though we have such a strong Coug spirit, we still have to pay folks for the value that they're bringing. And so regardless of, our need to bring students in, we have to have faculty and staff and professionals that are at the level that students want to come and be a part of this environment. And so we need to recognize and pay for that talent. So I think we're on that path, and I'm really excited that this is that first step. And I really appreciate that we're doing this kind of in steps. And so I have been excited. And so I do have some questions just to better understand as we move through this process. I think Heather's question relative to kind of my follow-up around geography, we are across the state and very proud of being in every county in Washington. That also creates some complications in terms of the compensation. Certainly Pullman has its own complications, while a quaint little town trying to attract that talent to that town may be problematic. The cost of living in Seattle versus the cost of living in Southwest Washington or in Richland, as you've already mentioned, is difficult. I'm curious how you're managing the differences in each of the geographic market regions. So to your point about kind of that minimum, beyond just the minimum of what the job responsibilities might be, you overlay that with where that position is based, and you dramatically impact that problem. And so I'm curious what that strategy looks like for those folks that are in those other markets that might be significantly higher.
Well, with the zones, we actually have 3 different salary structures. So zone 1 has one salary structure, zone 2 has another salary structure, and zone 3 has yet a separate salary structure. And so we're addressing it that way. So it's not a matter of Vancouver and Pullman are in the same exact salary structure. We're using the same methodology and the same ranges, but the salary structure increases as you go into the higher cost of labor zones. So being in Vancouver, it's zone 3. I think it's 8% higher than Pullman at this point in time. And again, all of what we put in place is a measure to start with. It's implementation, and then we're going to move and change things as we see a need for. Any future changes to the salary structure is going to need to be done in concert with university leadership, so that we're not making changes and being in the same place we are now, where we're making a change. It's significantly impacting where employee groups are falling within the different salary ranges. And again, there's not necessarily the funding to address it.
But I would say, correct me if I'm wrong here, but just I will remind everybody, it's data-based.
It is.
It's not just the emotion of I lived in an area and housing's higher than it is for everybody else in the state. It's really using that data to support what those deltas are, as opposed to us making that decision because we feel a certain way about a certain place.
That's correct. It is database.
I want to.
And how often is that data being refreshed or looked at?
Well, we just launched it May. And so go ahead. Melissa?
Oh, well, we're constantly looking at the data, but we're also needing to look at the impacts of it, because with what we're seeing with inflation and cost of labor increases, realistically, we could be looking at needing to raise salary ranges to address that. In private industry, typically you would see you track trends, but then the salary ranges don't change every year. They might change every 2 to 3 years, so that you're not making a widely impacting decision on your salary ranges based on a market anomaly or a spike. You're averaging that out and making an informed decision on how your salary ranges change based on trends over time. I lost your question. I'm so sorry.
Well, I just think I always try to think about the communications message to employees. So
Yeah.
if I'm an employee, when can I rely on when your team is looking at market conditions? Is it an annual? Is it an every other year? So
we are looking at it annually. Well, we're going to be looking at annually. With the concerns I received over the implementation period just within the last 6 months, I have been looking at zones and potentially moving locations. But again, we really need to be mindful on what changes we're making. It's not all areas have the ability to raise salaries. And that's a concern that I'm hearing from some of the leaders that I'm working with is, I want to do this. I don't have it in my budget yet. Can you help me plan for this? Can you help me identify, I can do this. How many years can I spread this out over, and talking them through.
So as
what
we're
that might look
looking
like.
at that annually, we would come forward to leadership if there was some significant change to propose moving something if it was going to be a huge impact. So it wouldn't be done just HR deciding, let's move all these ranges, but at least looking annually, just probably every 2 years doing a more critical assessment. But if there's significant changes, it would be brought forward to talk it through because of the impact that employees are already feeling and units. If there's not the funding to address it, we want to make sure we're being thoughtful.
and again, you're building a philosophy.
Yeah.
So it's not like it's already
Right.
built, but it's the beginning of that in the communication message.
Yeah, and building that philosophy is going to help provide a better foundation for that.
Right. I had a couple questions around the market data. I think you answered them, but you're assessing market data, both utilizing pay scale and then university specific data to be able to determine market rates. Okay.
Yeah, and a lot of times with positions, there was a blend of both of those sources being used to assess a particular position. Because one, like Coupa data may fit better for one position, or a pay scale may fit better for another, or there's portions of either that fit.
How are you handling when maybe an employee leaves and then, or maybe is offered another position and then brings in a similar position from a competitor university? Are you using that as market data as well? How does that impact decisions around pay increases, or does it?
That's really, it can impact the offer that the department is making. From human resources standpoint, it doesn't impact the ranges necessarily, but it does impact the offer and potentially salary compression within the department. But we are noting, we do note what competitors are paying for that same position, but it's anecdotal, and there's so many factors that have gone into that employee salary at that other institution. It could be longevity, it's hard to fully say, because you were this type of manager at this company, that's how we need to be paying that manager within WSU, because there's so many external factors that we don't have visibility into on why they're being paid that.
Okay, I have two more questions and then I'm done. And one is for President, and one more, I think, maybe for Actually, maybe both are for you. So I'm curious, compensation is a key opportunity for really utilizing an equity lens. And I am wondering about how our commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion is part of building the philosophy and developing the framework, and how, in terms of the work that we are doing as a university, there are tons of initiatives that are being done and groups that have been stood up specifically around how we advance our mission relative to this. And so I'm just curious how those groups might be involved in helping to inform how equity plays a role within this compensation philosophy. So I don't know if that's, I mean, I see the word equity, but I just would love to hear a little bit more, understand it a little bit more. And I don't know if that's to the team or to you.
Again, since this is sort of step one,
Yeah.
I think what I would do is, as we develop a compensation philosophy for WSU, so it's AP classified faculty, and as we kind of write that down and develop that key set of principles, I mean, I think this has to be in it, and then it's got to be actionable. So I'm going to take that, Lisa, instead of long explanations now, to say we need to go back, and as we have these presentations, I think that's a clear expectation that when we say, okay, here's what our compensation philosophy is for WSU, and the board looks at it, you go, okay, that's in there and it's an integral part. So we established this year with Stacy, Elizabeth, others, a fund to start dealing with equity and salary compression issues, particular gender equity issues amongst faculty. We allocate $1 million going through the process now, working with people on that. And we want to do that on a reoccurring basis. So it's not a one-time thing.
Yep.
These have been issues for a long time. And, when we talk to groups about that appropriately, people ask other questions. Well, what about longevity? What about this? And what about that? And, my answer on always is that it's like eating an elephant. You got to take a bite at a time. And I'm not trying to make a silly analogy. It's that if you're not careful, there's so many things you never start. You're like, we can't solve this. We don't do that. So we've decided to take this step forward with faculty in this, and we know it's not going to be enough money. But on the other hand, it's better than saying we just don't know what we can do, so we're going to do nothing. So Lisa, I think we'll put this in it as we develop, and that's the reason we want to do this in a multiple meeting format by the Regents. So we get to the end, people say, you listen to us, you put in what we would expect, and you're actionable. So
if I may,
Please.
just one PS is that we did implement the equity assessment tool that Mel and Zoe Heichel-Strong, they chaired a group and made a recommendation. So we will have a philosophy, but then when you're looking at actual policies and procedures, we can apply the equity tool, which we adopted, I think this group adopted in part of our policies, so that we can make sure that our guiding principles and our actual policies or practices are connecting and supporting
Right.
equity.
Awesome. That's what I was looking for, how they're all connected together. Do we have a sense of how large the number is to be able to bring everybody up to the minimum? I think you were asking for a bucket of money, so I was just curious, what does that check look like?
Break your checkbook.
Right.
I don't have that number today. I did have the number at one point in time. We had a significant number of areas be able to bring employees up. The total number, we have 174 employees that are below minimum. I can get that dollar amount. I don't have that today.
If I remember right, it was on the order of $1 million-ish, maybe a little less than that. Maybe it was 700,000. But then what wound up happening is we did a mass salary increase. Some units found dollars. And so it was, so that's a much smaller number than it was
Yes.
previously. And I think there was certainly an acknowledgement that we need to centrally find some dollars. We got to balance it with everything else we're trying to do, centrally find some dollars to be able to help units that didn't have the resources to move themselves up. So I would say at the next meeting, we can have an updated number, and we're happy to share that with the Regents as to what it would take to get there.
I really appreciate your patience with me as I ask these questions, and I'm very excited about this. I think that it speaks to the focus that we have all said is so important as we move kind of strategically forward. So I have finished my list of questions. Regent Shetler. And
I have one more
okay.
comment. Uh, Regent Stetler's comment about the performance evaluation process, I just wanted before uh, we let our HRS folks go sit over there and go out to the local bar after doing their presentation. One of the challenge, we have two challenges with performance evaluation, I would say. You know, one is the tools and all that, and they've gotten better every year I've been at WSU. The challenge I want you all to talk a little bit about this is also training managers on how to do performance evaluations well. We will, and HRS has to deal with this all the time. Kirk brings a problem employee we want to do a separation from. They pull the performance evaluations and says, oh, the person got, you know, the top performance evaluations for the last 4 years, and now you're saying this person's been has performance issues for multiple years. So what we've got to do is make sure it's not just do we have a wonderful computerized system in place of people to do it, but we need people to managers to make sure then leaders that they're also performing these well, and don't shy away if somebody is not performing at level of documenting that. And so I'll tee that up. You can comment on this if you want, but it's, I think, highly variable across campus.
Yeah, that would be correct.
Yeah.
Also that we don't have currently, if you don't know, our performance reviews for staff are not maintained electronically. So with the Workday, what we're hoping for is that's going to be an easier process where managers are going to be able to do it more time. They'll get reminders to do the reviews. With the training, that's the key is working with people. We do tie it into merit increases, which is one of the goals is it's all tied together with those decision making. The decision making is that the overinflation of evaluations and are dealt with, and that people realize the meaning of the evaluation for the employee. So and actually doing them, since it's required to do annual reviews annually at WSU. So yeah, it's been an ongoing project, but we're continuing doing the outreach to managers on how the importance of reviews and the meaning to the employees when they get those. I think at WSU, one of the challenges is we're kind of institutionalized. We have long-term employees who it's difficult year after year after year meeting with somebody who's been there like 25 years, right? But it's important to continue to do that and making it a meaningful experience for the employee and the manager, and then the why do we do this? So yeah, we'll be enhancing our training and outreach to people, looking at enhancing that whole process to modernize it and make it meaningful.
Well, thank you both, Teresa and Melissa. Thank you. That was a lot of work. It was a great presentation. I appreciate it very much, and thank the Regents also for your thoughtful comments. Right now, we're going to take a 15-minute break, and then we will come back for discussion item number 2, which is our legislative update. So we will reconvene at 10:35.
Oh my God.
Chris is ready to go. So the rest of the room's still getting breakfast cookies, but I think
Okay,
we're getting close.
okay. Thank you.
Ooh, now we're ready.
Thank you, Regent